You're listening to Moments by the Upside Down People podcast. These are powerful clips capturing transformative insights and heartfelt thoughts from some of our most engaged with and inspiring guests. We hope that as you listen to them, you're encouraged and inspired, and that there's a deepening in your walk with Jesus as a result. If you haven't already, please be sure to like and follow and subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, and share it with your family and friends. With that said, let's get into today's moment. What you're saying is like these competing ideas, which have also sort of infiltrated in society, is like one is you give yourself over to desires, which you're talking about the hedonistic self. And then the other is like you give yourself over to control, which is voluntary self-sacrifice. So everything to find meaning, you try and control things in your life, whether it's your emotions, your appetite, your desire, whatever that looks. And that's why I think you're saying like the Stoics were very good at that. What, if you can unpack a bit more, like what is the danger of leaning into one of those over the other and not like trying to understand and apply the biblical lens to your life?
I think part of it is that they both crush you in the end. Neither of them are good masters. You know, desires are great. You know, a lot of our lives run on the fuel of desire, and trying to quash one's impulses and desires, I think, is very damaging. And also, rationality is invaluable. So I'm not saying that these things are defective, but they don't make good monarchs of the self. Desire, for many of the reasons that, you know, are readily thinkable. If someone gives himself over to a life of drugs or whatever, you know, that the stories that circulate in our culture of that ending well are few and far between. But perhaps the idea that rationality is not a great, or stoic self-sacrifice is not a great master, needs a little bit more unpacking. I think the problem here is partly Paul's problem in Romans 7. It's that you're never good enough. And there's a sense in which that's motivating. Well, you know, I never want to have arrived. I always want to be climbing. But as life goes on, I think the sort of the lodestar of perfect control becomes the tyranny of perfect control. And you either have to face the reality that you're not the person that your ideology, or in Christian terms, your idol of self-control, would have you to be, which leads to despair. I think if you take it seriously, that leads to despair. Or you have to renounce it altogether. And I think I tried to show in one of my videos on Peterson that I think that's where his system ultimately leads. You either have to stop being serious about it and just play at self-control, or if you are fully serious about it, you end up inevitably staring despair in the face, especially as you get older. So I just don't think it's very healthy. And I think that both of those positions, either giving yourself over to your desire or seeking sort of an utter voluntary self-sacrifice, do damage to the intricate complexity of what it is to be a human being. I don't think any one of our faculties is meant to or does well when it rules over the others. I think you get truncated, shriveled, sort of disproportioned people, you know, as if every day down the gym were upper body day and it was never leg day. You know, people who just look strange when that happens. I think it's much more satisfying to have as an aim to integrate all of our faculties, not by making one of them the imperialistic overlord of the others, but by finding some principle of integration that's outside the self, which I think is precisely the tool that Peterson cannot pick up because he doesn't have that biblical metaphysic.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And why do you think? This may be very simple in asking, but it always fascinates me. Is why do you think there is this tension within individuals and society as a whole to sort of pick one over the other as a framework to try and wrestle with, as opposed to, like you're saying, that disintegrates your humanity, and it actually it doesn't lead to human flourishing. So why do we continue to choose one over the other?
That is such a deep question. I think, hesitatingly, that it's one aspect of a much, much bigger problem that we've got, which is wherever you look, whether it's in terms of personal identity or whether it's in terms of social cohesion, we've got a massive sharing problem today. We don't share well. And so the one aspect of that you've raised there is that we find it hard to find, and this language might seem strange to begin with, but hopefully I'm going to spin it out in a way that makes it seem less strange, is that we find it hard to find a common good among our different faculties, like how to get my desire and my will and my reason working together for a common weal, a commonwealth. That doesn't mean that one of them has to dominate the others. Like, is there any way of doing it that is non-imperial? Would be the way of thinking about that in terms of the self. And then when you get to society, it looks pretty similar. We're not that good these days, I would suggest, at sharing the space of society across differences. You see that in political polarization. You see it in what gets called the culture wars. You see it in what some people have called the increasing tribalization of society. Society sort of siloing itself off into different antagonistic groups that see the game of society as a zero-sum game between them. And in some ways, that's a macrocosm of this microcosmic problem of the self. So whether you look at society or the self, we don't do sharing very well anymore. And that's a problem. It's a problem socially in terms of fracture and antagonism and different parts of society just not understanding each other anymore, regardless of whether there's agreement or disagreement, just not understanding how people who are not like me see the world. I think there is a crisis of that. And I think on the level of the self, there's a lot of the meaning crisis that can be explained in terms of this fragmentation of the self, but not just fragmentation, a fragmentation that leaves us in a position where we're unable to find a way of holding the fragments together. I think that's the key issue. It's not simply that the self is fragmented, it's that we can't find a common good among the fragments, or even a commons among the fragments anymore.